December 9th, 1940, dawn. The Egyptian desert south of Sidi Barrani. 50 British tanks rolled toward an Italian camp at Nibewa. They were short, squat, ugly things. Barely 15 miles per hour at full speed, waddling across the sand on undersized tracks. The Italians opened fire, 47mm anti-tank rounds, 75mm field guns, 20mm autocannons. Everything they had. The shells bounced off. Every single one. Within hours, over 4,000 Italian soldiers surrendered. British losses in the 7th Royal Tank Regiment that morning were 2 killed and 5 wounded. The tank responsible was the infantry tank Mark II, the Matilda II, named after a duck, slow as a walking soldier, powered by 2 London bus engines, and for 18 extraordinary months, the most feared armoured vehicle on any battlefield it entered. To understand why the Matilda II existed, you need to understand a problem that consumed British planners throughout the 1930s. The last war had taught them that infantry needed armoured support to cross no man's land, but the tanks of that era were either too fast and too thin, or too expensive for peacetime budgets. In 1934, Major General Sir Hugh Ells, Master General of the Ordnance, and the man who had commanded the entire tank corps in the First World War, approved a cheap stopgap design, the A11 Matilda I. It cost £6,000. It carried 60mm of armour, but it was a 2-man vehicle armed with nothing but a single machine gun, crawling at 8 miles per hour. Everyone knew it was inadequate from the start. The real need was for a tank that could survive dedicated anti-tank fire while carrying a gun capable of killing enemy armour. In September 1936, the Mechanisation Board issued the A12 specification, 60mm of armour minimum, a 2-pounder gun, diesel engines. The design was produced at the Royal Arsenal, Woolwich, drawing on the earlier A7 medium tank prototype. Vulcan Foundry, a locomotive manufacturer in Newton-le-Willows, received the contract. Their first prototype arrived at Farnborough in April 1938 and passed its 1,000-mile trials. The critical engineering challenge was power. No single British engine of that era could move 27 tons of cast steel armour, so the designers did something unusual. They bolted 2 AEC 6-cylinder diesel engines side by side in the hull, the same units that powered London double-decker buses. Each produced 87 horsepower for a combined output of roughly 174. Later marks switched to twin Leyland diesels producing 95 horsepower each. It was the first British tank to run on diesel fuel, cutting fire risk compared to petrol engines. The hull itself was built from massive cast steel sections bolted together. The pointed nose was a single casting so large it emerged from the mould thicker than planned, requiring workers to grind away excess metal by hand. According to Vickers production assessments, 2 Valentine tanks could be built in the time it took to manufacture 1 Matilda II. 6 firms eventually shared production, from Vulcan Foundry and John Fowler in Leeds to Harland and Wolff in Belfast. When war broke out in September 1939, only 2 Matilda IIs existed. By the time production ended in August 1943, 2,987 had been built. The specifications tell you why this tank terrified its enemies. 78mm of armour on the front hull, 75mm all around the turret, cast in a single piece of hardened steel with no rivet weak points. The 2-pounder gun fired armour-piercing shot at 792 metres per second, penetrating 53mm of armour at 100 yards. The tank carried 93 rounds of main gun ammunition and 2,925 rounds for the coaxial 7.92mm Beza machine gun. Crew of 4. Road speed, 15 miles per hour. Cross-country in desert sand, closer to 6. But one dimension mattered more than all others. The turret ring was 54 inches across. That number, invisible from outside, sealed the Matilda's fate. It was physically impossible to fit a 6-pounder gun without a completely new turret. One prototype was attempted. It was abandoned. The Soviets tried to mount a 76mm ZIS-5 gun from the KV-1. Too cramped. Scrapped. The Matilda was born with a ceiling on its firepower that could never be raised. The tank's first combat came at Arras on May 21, 1940, during the German blitzkrieg through France. 16 Matilda IIs and 58 Matilda Is from the 4th and 7th Royal Tank Regiments attacked Rommel's 7th Panzer Division. German 37mm anti-tank guns proved completely useless. According to Brigadier Douglas Pratt, commander of the 1st Army Tank Brigade, one Matilda took 14 direct hits from enemy 37mm guns with no harmful effect. German anti-tank gunners abandoned their weapons. Some surrendered, others lay flat on the ground pretending to be dead. Rommel himself was caught in the fighting near Whaley. His aide, Lieutenant Most, was mortally wounded beside him. Rommel ordered 88mm anti-aircraft guns depressed to fire directly at the advancing tanks. personally assigning targets to each gun crew. It was the first systematic use of the 88 in an anti-tank role against heavy armour. British losses were severe, 46 of 74 tanks destroyed, and both battalion commanders killed. But German casualties were 378 dead and wounded, 4 times Rommel's total losses during the entire breakthrough into France. He reported to his superiors that he had been attacked by 5 infantry divisions. In reality, it was 2 tank battalions. That exaggeration contributed to the German decision to pause the panzer advance, and that pause helped make Dunkirk possible. According to military historian Liddell Hart, it may well be asked whether 2 battalions have ever had such a tremendous effect on history. Now, before we get into the desert campaign where this tank truly earned its legend, if you are enjoying this deep dive into British engineering, hit subscribe. It takes a second, costs nothing, and helps the channel grow. Right, back to North Africa. The 7th Royal Tank Regiment shipped from Liverpool in August 1940 and arrived at Port Said with a full complement of new Matilda IIs. They were hidden under Bedouin tents in the desert, waiting for Operation Compass. At Nibewa on December 9th, the Matildas shattered the Italian garrison. Every Italian weapon bounced off the armour. A captured Italian army doctor described the Matildas as the nearest thing to hell he had ever seen. At Sidi Barrani the following day, one Matilda was hit 38 times and remained fully operational. By December 11th, 38,300 Italian prisoners had been taken. The assault on Bardia in January 1941 used just 23 serviceable Matildas. Australian Major General Mackay stated that each Matilda of the 7th was worth a whole battalion to him. One tank commander found evidence of 46 direct hits on his vehicle afterward, none of which had penetrated. 40,000 Italians surrendered. At Tobruk, only 18 Matildas were available. Another 25,000 prisoners fell within hours. Total Operation Compass haul across 2 months, 133,298 Italian prisoners. The comparative numbers explain the dominance. The Italian M1340 carried 30mm of frontal hull armour and 42mm on its turret. The Matilda had more than double that protection, and its 2-pounder destroyed the Italian tank at over 1,000 metres, while the Italian 47mm gun could not penetrate the Matilda at any practical range. Against the Panzer III, the disparity was equally stark. The German 37mm tank gun penetrated only 34mm at 100 metres. Against 78mm of British cast steel, it was hopeless. Even the short 50mm gun on upgraded Panzer IIIs managed just 55mm at 100 metres, still insufficient at normal combat ranges. The only anti-tank weapon in the Axis arsenal that could reliably kill a Matilda was the 88mm anti-aircraft gun, and Rommel did not have many of those in early 1941. The trap was sprung at Hellfire Pass on June 15, 1941 during Operation Battleaxe. C Squadron, 4th Royal Tank Regiment, 12 Matildas, advanced into the pass at dawn. Concealed 88mm guns of Flak Regiment 33 opened fire. The battery was commanded by Major Wilhelm Georg Bach, a former Lutheran pastor later nicknamed the Pastor of Hellfire Pass. 11 of 12 Matildas were destroyed in minutes. According to surviving accounts, Major Miles, the squadron commander, was last heard on radio saying they are tearing my tanks apart. Operation Battleaxe cost 64 Matildas out of roughly 92 committed. The Matilda's reign of invincibility was over. By mid-1942, the tank was definitively outclassed in North Africa. Its last use as a gun tank by British forces came at the First Battle of El Alamein in July of that year. At Second El Alamein in October, the surviving Matildas served only as Scorpion mine flail vehicles, spinning chains to detonate mines ahead of the advancing army. But the Matildas' war was far from finished. Under Lend-Lease, 1,084 were shipped to the Soviet Union. 918 arrived. The rest lost to Arctic convoy attacks. At the Battle of Moscow in late 1941, Lend-Lease armour made up only about 2% of total Soviet tank strength, but 30 to 40% of medium and heavy tanks. A critical contribution during the crisis. Soviet crews appreciated the armour but despised the performance in Russian conditions. Snow packed behind the armoured side skirts and froze solid, immobilising the vehicle. The smooth tracks had almost no grip on ice. 409 Matildas went to Australian forces in the Pacific, where the tank found a second life. Slow speed was irrelevant in jungle fighting. 78mm of armour defeated everything Japan could throw at it. The close support variant with its 3-inch howitzer became the preferred weapon, firing at point-blank range into Japanese bunkers. The Matilda Frog flamethrower variant projected flame 80 to 90 yards. Australian Matildas fought at Balikpapan, Borneo in July 1945 and were still in action on August 15th. the last day of the war. The Matilda is the only British-designed tank to have served in frontline combat from the war's first armoured engagement to its last. The origin of the name Matilda is genuinely uncertain. The popular story claims it was named after a cartoon duck because the tank waddled, but Tank Museum historian David Fletcher found the name in designer Sir John Carden's notes from October 1935, months before any prototype existed or could be observed moving. No pre-war cartoon duck named Matilda has been identified by researchers. The name was likely a vicar's internal code name, possibly chosen for its old Germanic meaning, mighty in battle. Approximately 70 Matilda IIs survive worldwide today. The Tank Museum at Bovington holds a running example, fully restored in 2018. The Royal New South Wales Lancers Museum in Sydney preserves Ace, the first tank off the landing craft at Balikpapan, restored to running condition. 2,987 built, 133,000 prisoners taken during Operation Compass alone, frontline service from 1940 to 1945, across France, North Africa, East Africa, Crete, the Soviet Union, and the Pacific. The Matilda II was slow, undergunned, and obsolete almost from the day it was designed. Its turret ring guaranteed it could never grow beyond its original 2-pounder. Its twin bus engines were an ingenious improvisation that became a maintenance nightmare, and yet for 18 months it was the most formidable tank on Earth, earning the title Queen of the Desert through victories so lopsided they read like fiction. That was British engineering in 1940. Not elegant, not future-proof. But when it mattered most, when Italian shells bounced off like tennis balls and German anti-tank gunners fled their weapons, absolutely unstoppable.